Hi, and thank you for joining this very first episode of Mediumystic. I'm your host, Kristen Harlow. Today, I sit down with fourth generation starseed medium Joseph Bram to discuss ancestral lines, the coming Christ consciousness, archetypal energy, and the space between. It's an eye opening conversation, and I really hope you enjoy. Joseph, thank you for sitting down with me again
Absolutely.
for the 100 millionth time. First time we met, you had joined my meetup group, which is like a medium circle, open medium circle weekly. And it just was so apparent to me right away when you were working, you know, which is what I'd call it, honestly, working, you know, when you're channeling, you just have this like openness and this connection to symbolism that I think is tough to, you know, get as deeply as you do. And just such a flow of communication, and you really reach the people that you're uh, sitting with. How much do you think that, or not how much, what, how do you think the communication is different between different ancestries, you know, different ancestry lines? How much would you say it, um, the communication form differs, as, you know, my experience is coming from a totally different place than anyone else's, right? So what are your thoughts about that?
That's a really great question. I think for myself, this ability, I'll call it ability, has been passed down through generations on my part.
Mm.
So it's interesting where Christianity kind of comes into the picture because that did change the dynamic of working. I love the way you said working because that's actually what we call it in our culture as well.
Oh, wow.
So I see, I feel you're super tapped into my ancestry right now as well.
Yeah.
So Christianity did change the dynamic as far as how rituals, because it's not simply just reading for us, it's also the ritual aspect of it as well. Even as far as how a tarot reader would maybe leave their cards out on a full moon.
Hmm.
My whole understanding is changing that once you start working with one form of energy, consciousness as a whole wants you to start learning more forms of energy. That could be your higher self, or but you get encouraged somehow to start seeing that everything is energy and that different modalities help you become more adept in working with energy. So to say how would our ancestral traditions impact the way that we work? I think first of all, archetypal energies are universal. So if I am
Hmm.
of if I'm of
That's interesting, because I was going to ask you later, you know, just because it's another thing I was thinking about, whether you think ascended master energy is a blueprint. So it kind of sounds like the same thing. Anyway, go ahead.
super interesting. And if I'm speaking about the deity Lord Ganesh, for example, the remover of obstacles, I think I've seen that deity around in so many different settings that are not
Mm.
Hindu specific, because I think that deity, that archetype reaches out to the people who are on this work, on this path. But I think as far as specific ancestors, I want to give you an example. Um, One time I was doing a reading and I was connecting to an individual who was of Haitian descent. She was an older woman, and she was coming to a point where she was entering a new phase of her life. So when I tapped into the reading, and I just want to make sure with spirit that I'm allowed to share these details. Yeah, they say absolutely. So the way I feel is, I started tuning into some, mature women who were sitting on a porch and they were talking amongst each other. They didn't want me to hear. So from a medium perspective, it's interesting. I'm like, I'm connected to individuals who don't want me to hear what they're speaking about. So at first I was like, okay, why am I invited into this reading if I'm not supposed to be privy to what they're speaking about? But when I was relaying that information, I started to understand that that's how they were validating the secrecy of their culture. So
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't about keeping me out, it was just about validating the way the culture works for the sitter. And she completely resonated. So I think another thing is that sometimes when I'm giving a reading, people's family members stay behind for a little while before they leave
Mm.
to speak to me personally and encourage me to say, thank you for what you're doing, keep going. That's almost the cherry on top of reading. So I don't think anyone's ancestry is necessarily exclusive as far as one's ancestral tradition or way is going to be barred to anyone who's not from that lineage. The ancestors have their own consciousness and they choose who they want to work with. That's my point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Some people will disagree and there are closed practices, and I respect that. But I think, as far as at the end of the day, you and I, at least in my opinion, we reach the same conclusion in energy, the
Mm-hmm.
healing work, the
Mm-hmm.
conveying of the message. So the way we do it, it's all the same path up to the same pinnacle, if you want to see it that way. But what I will say is that different cultures definitely have different modalities for connecting with spirit. So
Yeah, like my background is one of really no true connection with ancestors in the way that so many other cultures experience it, or people, whatever you want to say, and so it's not that we don't think, obviously we think about the people who have passed, and but there's not a lot of emphasis placed on, an ancestor altar, or, even the kind of the help that ancestors bring to other people. It's not really asked for within my background. Not that it's not wanted, it's just not even considered. It's like this person has passed and that they are no more, and you talk to them in your own way. And but there's a real community around ancestry for many people. And so I just became curious about that, because it's just, it's so varied, and yet here I am with a very deep connection to spirit as well. So it is, in the end, it is an energetic. I agree. It is we meet in energy, and that all is the same, and it's beautiful. It's poetry, Um,
we are our ancestors, not only just literally our
yeah.
biology, but spiritually we are also our ancestors. And the traumas we work through, this is something I have to remind myself often. A lot of the things that I localize to myself as far as flaws or things I'm working on, I
Hmm.
it's so helpful to remember that we are working through things that we inherit spiritually.
Hmm. Yes, and energetically.
Absolutely. So I try to transmute a lot of the things that I think I've inherited. And I think that's part of why I have come forward into this experience, because as I've stated with, I do make YouTube videos, but like one of my videos that are highlighted for me, and one of my points I like to express to people is that you come into a bloodline that has trauma, but also has gifts. So your soul takes the gifts of that bloodline
Hmm.
to work through the traumas. I
Hmm.
don't believe that a soul would come into a bloodline where there is not enough resources to work through the trauma. That's
Yeah. No.
I I think my forte is in feeling. And if I was to go to astrology, I am a Cancer moon, so that is a very feeling placement in astrology. And I was actually interesting. I was thinking about this last night. Is like we are electromagnetic beings. So we, if, for example, your eyes are closed and I'm standing a distance from you, but I'm looking at you intensely, I at least myself can feel that if someone's looking at me from a distance. Is that an electromagnetic interaction, or is that a psychic interaction? I think it's both, and
Yep.
I think in time the scientific community is going to merge with those of us who are more on the I, I don't think metaphysical is the right term, but on the feeling community.
I
I
think
don't
so
necessarily,
too. Yeah.
even as far as, I was reading an article called Faking Cultural Literacy. It's just like there's so much information in this day and age that we don't have the time to read everything thoroughly
Right, right.
as we used to.
It's
There's
the
just
information age, baby.
right, absolutely. So I think one thing for myself is that I'm kind of putting myself out here. I don't really read, and I don't necessarily look at other. I love to learn from other mediums through conversations, or anyone through conversations, but I don't necessarily read books. If I have a question, I go within and I ask for my own answer. There
Hmm.
are crystals that if I want to know how that crystal is going to affect me and work with me, I ask the crystal directly. If there's a certain archetypal energy, I need to figure out how it works with me. And I would never tell someone else,
That's right.
right? So there's a place where theory and practicality
Hmm.
bump heads, because as we were discussing with tarot, if spirit was to tell me that a 5 was a 7, I'm taking it as what spirit's telling me, right? So as far
Yeah,
as like how applying knowledge, when it comes to applying knowledge, I think theory needs we relax the theoretical aspects of it for what actually is going to happen. One thing I wanted to just you raised the point that I think about how different are we really from our ancestors. So for example, you brought up Josephus, who's like kind of known for, sometimes going off or embellishing. And I think even in this day and age, like people, everyone has substance. I believe everyone has substance, but we sell ourselves to a degree to be relevant, to be in the spotlight.
hmm.
And this could just be part of the human condition to want to be accepted.
Hmm.
So
Hmm. Yep.
how different are we today from our ancestors back then, who may have put a little spin on things just to, you know
Yeah. I think we are so very much the same in that regard. I mean, that the fear of being kicked out of the campfire circle was like the biggest fear imaginable, because you're kicked out, you're in the woods, you're alone for the first time without a total support system. You're probably not going to survive by yourself, and you have enormous animals on your ass the whole time, just like a total disaster until you die, right? What is it that we see as outside the campfire circle? What is it that we are so terrified of being ejected into if it's not that? I don't
wow.
think I do think there is something. It's fear of being shelterless, and fear of being of starving, and fear of not being able to protect the people we love, and and that all, of course, is real. But if we all loosened our grip on that a little bit, maybe we wouldn't have to fear it quite as much, because we'd start to understand slowly, slowly, slowly that there is no starvation, there is no being kicked out of the campfire circle, if we all stop trying to control one another and stop putting one another under our thumbs and taking land and murdering and tricking and deceiving and making poor in many aspects. And so it's learning to climb up from that innate, very driven fear of being kicked out, and beginning to slowly realize nobody can kick you out of anything, you know?
That even this is interesting for I think where humanity is right now, just as far as even the structure of the brain. We have the substantia nigra, which would be called I think, I may be wrong, but the reptilian brain. It's just a very primitive aspect of the brain
Hmm.
that's very much about like survival by any means necessary.
Hmm.
And moving into like the expanding our consciousness into the other areas of the brain that just like there's enough for everyone. There's more into that altruism and
Altruism, yeah. It's an
I,
old word.
I think what I love how you are courageous enough to go into this, because for me I'm just seeing the layers of how, even, they say the black sheep in the family is usually the one that can see through a lot of the BS. I think even as far as we want to maintain this sort of status quo way about ourselves so that we're not the outcast, but at the same time it's the ones in society who, often it has been the ones in society who went off the beaten path and had the courage to tap into their creativity to, like, say for example, Mexico City is built on a swamp. It's one of the oldest, probably the oldest city in the world. It was built on a swamp. That, as an engineering feat, would have been something that the average person would not even consider possible. It's
Mhm.
still in existence to this day. I think this is also where our relationship with spirit is so important, because spirit is omnipotent. It is I think this is where you're co-creating on the expanding edge of all that is, when you step out and that foundation is being built underfoot step by step. It's not even there yet. A lot of I was I'm very inspired by Tesla, and one of the things Nikola Tesla was saying is that, say for example, where is our internal battery? If you're looking at, say, um, Taoism or something, we would talk about, or Qigong, we would talk about the Dantian, where we store life force energy, or in yoga, they would talk about the chakra system. These are looking at subtle energies. And one thing Tesla was saying is like, how does the human being pull more energy into their being? So it's almost like, it's almost like the like the chromosomes. Where is the spirit? I wish I could word this better for now, but this is the essence of what I'm talking about. Where does the physical, empirical investigation of the world merge with the spiritual
I
investigation?
know, I know. We've talked about this before. You're looking for that like knife's edge, that little point where it
Yes,
balances in between. I know. I remember it, and that is something we just can't know, I guess. I mean, not now, at least. It's maybe because it's ineffable, it's also impossible to understand.
something that's coming to me is almost like, when human beings figure this out, it's like I feel it in my body, the explosion that comes from the separation of an atom. I feel the explosion of it coming together. It's like
Yep.
it's going to happen, and I think that we are
You
working.
think the understanding of it, the knowledge of the root, the base, is that what you mean? Of all that is? Is that
I
what you're
I feel
yeah.
it, and I think it's going to be a part of how technology evolves.
Yeah,
That technology will be we will navigate technology through consciousness, not like.
definitely. Makes sense to me. I mean, even just watching Stephen Greer's stuff where he have you ever seen any of his like
I
disclosure?
I wish I could watch that stuff, but I just, my attention doesn't allow me to. I wish I
I
could.
hear you. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I
just
wish
not
I
your
could be
thing.
more familiar with those sort types of things, but I'm sure I've seen it in passing. But yeah,
I mean, you can look him up online too. I think his organization is called SETI, SETI, which, but it's he's just got an interesting take on the whole existence of ETs and what ETs are, which he believes they're people, and that's what he calls them, not ETs or aliens, but people.
are we
And
ETs to others?
right, I mean, yeah, exactly. And he also is of the belief that what they are doing is they have learned to control their consciousness in order to travel, and so they are somehow their technology is connected to their consciousness and they're traveling here. and they are, up, regularly present. And I don't know, I've never experienced his work or been in his group, so I don't know if it's a fact or not. But supposedly he, creates meditation circles in the night, usually in the desert. And, they meditate for a half hour, maybe an hour, and then they focus on calling on the energy above, and it works. Apparently he has, video of it, and a lot of video. I don't know, but I will say that it's an interesting take on what another civilization would be like, and it would be such that we couldn't possibly understand unless we were told. It's just not innate to us yet.
I'm being brought to something right now that we've discussed off camera, but you were talking about like the coming of Christ consciousness to the planet. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I don't know if I see it as like the coming. Well, I guess I do. You're right. That would be a good way to put it, the coming of Christ consciousness. Yeah, I was thinking the other day that it just felt right that all of us are in a different stage of finding our own Christhood or Buddhahood, or however you want to, the ascended master energy. I would call it Christ consciousness. Others might look at it differently, but it's all the same in the end, right? It's the same thing. And we're all on a different path to that. Like I might have 250 million years before I reach Christ consciousness. You might have 5,000. You know what I mean? And so that doesn't really matter though, because time, of course, isn't real, right? We know this. We live on it, and we have created a whole thing around it, but it's not real. And so eventually we will all come to a point where we reach Christ consciousness together at the same time. It's inevitable. If everything that ever was mentioned or is possible because of the idea of eternity, then how is it not possible that eventually we will all reach this level of ascended master, this raised consciousness level coming from love and forgiveness and compassion, and not even needing to say those words because they're not required in that being's life. There is no requirement of that because it's all love. We all eventually, just with math, basic math or complicated math, will reach Christ consciousness together. And then maybe, who knows what after that? Maybe that's the big ascension of the planet that brings us to the people that Stephen Greer, the ETs that Stephen Greer would call people. Maybe that's where it brings us. Maybe it brings us, who knows what it brings us? I couldn't say. That's my inclination, that it's this place of ascension, but could be anything. But it seems like an interesting idea, and one to pursue in this life, in that your ultimate aim is to reach this consciousness. I'll leave out the word Christ so that there's no prejudice. Just this consciousness. It's where you're going. Expanding, right? We're all expanding. Everything, the universe is expanding. So if it's where you're headed, why not try and make your job a little easier? And in this life, begin to try to show love by feeling all feelings, allowing them to exist, breathing with them, and never assigning any meaning to them, as in blame or story, just allowing them to be with breath. And then eventually getting to the place where you are free to live without the fear that limits us, and you ascend. And the path to doing that is trying to kind of, well, here's the question, not to change the subject because you didn't get to answer anything, but what is evil? Is evil an entity, a being, or is evil the reflection of our consciousness, our conscientious, the unconscious? I can't think of the term right now. What is it? The collective unconscious. Thank you.
Hmm.
Is that what it is? Or is it an entity? Or is it not real at all? What do you think?
Hmm. On that note, just give me 1 second. I'm going to do something quickly just to make sure that It's interesting that we're bringing this up because I have like a I have something in the background. It's an app and I just heard it go off and I'm like, "Oh my God." But that's the thing. It's experiencing everything in this moment and just I think the very smallest
What was the app?
experience, it's a WhatsApp web.
Okay.
So
This very smallest experience.
that moment of my embarrassment, I wanted to not feel it. I wanted to just be like, but the, the synchronicity of where it fit in, I just felt it just brought.
Yeah, I was hoping you were going to say it was like, calm or something, an app like that,
Oh,
something
that'd be.
so it would have like real, instead it's like, social media, whatever. But
You know what? One of the most profound experiences I've ever had spiritually, or just one of the most joyful experiences I've ever had, was I was in one of your circles and I decided to attend the circle outdoors. And you were opening the circle with um, an opening, and you had some music playing in the background,
Mhm.
very calm music, and the birds were chirping. And I was just sitting there, and the way I felt, I said, nothing even matters besides just enjoying this feeling. Everything, every other trajectory, every other ambition, every other call to a certain action, it just doesn't matter because I'm here in this observer state, just in bliss, in absolute bliss.
Mm,
And in that moment, I think I am like just one with everything, really.
mm. And you were outside, there were birds.
It
Was
was
it dark or light out?
it was twilight and it was warm.
Right. Oh, perfect time.
Oh, I just I
What was
you
your
know what?
experience of bliss?
I don't know if there's words for that. Like I would try to go through like inner glossary of like in Sanskrit they might call it Advaita, raw consciousness, love one. It's just a feeling. It's just existing. It's
Yeah.
existing with all that is. And as much as I think we could do that in every single moment, even in the embarrassment of an alert going off on my computer, wondering if that's going to come into the recording. It's all one moment. It's all one. It's like it makes me want to just get back there right now. But
It's being perfectly still, right? It's like perfectly still.
in that moment, I feel like Yeshua's with me. I feel like he's in me. You know, I am, and there is no I am. There is equal space for I am and not an I am.
The space between. That's your space. That's the space you want answers about. The knife's edge, the space between consciousness and matter, your obsession. You always want to know the answer to that, as we all do, but you really word it well. That like in between space. It's the space between. Wow.
I'm not sure if other people are like this, but often it's the way Geminis are described. It's like there's this thirst to understand everything, to have knowledge of everything. And when that just stops for a moment, and I think that's where you start to receive. Like if we're talking about it by the law of attraction, it's like opening yourself up to receive has something to do with not pushing, 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 pushing. You're now pulling in your experience. I want to thank you for bringing me to uh, this place again because it's not something that I would like it to be more familiar in my life, but even in wanting it to be more familiar is the more elusive that butterfly is of just that moment.
Yeah.
So I'm feeling some appreciation right now for how that comes when you're just letting things be.
Yeah. Yep. Letting things be. Exactly. It's like it's almost gotten to the place where it's almost corny to say this, which is pretty funny. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but you know, I realized the other day that be here and now are all the same word, you know? And it is just incredible when you realize that. It's mind blowing.
That
It
is
is.
amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, Joseph, this has been an incredible conversation as usual. I love talking to you. What is your, what is your website? I think you just,
Yeah. So it's still under it's getting there, but J, just the letter J, Bram creations.com. So there you can find other projects I'm working on as far as folk music, and I love conversations of all types. And also just my vlog is there, Gray Matter Reflections, as well as my blog I'm working on, Margins and Indents. So check it out.
excellent. Thank you. I will. I absolutely will. I will talk to you soon, my friend.